In the unforgiving dust of the Wyoming Territory, 1874, innocence was a luxury no one could afford, least of all Riley Miller. She was 18, untouched, and dreaming of a schoolteacher's life in Boston. Instead, she became currency. To settle a gambling debt that threatened to put her father in a shallow grave, she was handed over to Jamie Blackwood, a reclusive, widowed mountain man whispered to have killed a grizzly with his bare hands. Everyone in town pitied her. They said she wouldn't last a winter up on Blackwood Ridge. But what happened behind the heavy timber doors of his cabin wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a scandal that would burn the town to the ground. The wind in Bitter Creek didn't just blow. It scoured. It carried the grit of the high plains, peeling the paint off the saloon signs and settling into the creases of men's faces, aging them before their time. For Riley Miller, the wind felt like a premonition. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the small room above the general store her father managed, or rather, mismanaged. The floorboards were warped, and the air smelled of stale tobacco and fear. Downstairs, the shouting had stopped an hour ago. Now, there was only a heavy, suffocating silence. When the door creaked open, Thomas Miller didn't look at her. He was a man hollowed out by bad luck and worse choices. His hands shook as he took off his hat, turning the brim in his fingers until the felt began to fray. "Riley," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "Pack your trunk, the small one." Riley stood up, smoothing the front of her calico dress. She was 18, with hair the color of spun wheat and eyes that held a quiet, observant intelligence. Too intelligent for a town that only valued women for their labor or their silence. "Pack? Are we leaving, Papa? Did the creditors take the store?" Thomas finally looked up, and the shame in his eyes hit her like a physical blow. "I ain't leaving, you are." "Me? To go where? Aunt Martha's in St. Louis?" Hope fluttered in her chest. Aunt Martha had books. She had a piano. "No," Thomas said, the word dropping like a stone. "You're going up the mountain. To Blackwood Ridge." The air left the room. "Blackwood Ridge? Papa, that's where Jamie Blackwood lives. The trapper." "He's a rancher now, mostly," Thomas muttered, looking at the floor again. "And he needs a wife, a mother for those 3 wild Halians of his." "A wife?" Riley whispered, the blood draining from her face. "Papa, Jamie Blackwood is twice my age. People say he's a savage. They say his first wife died of fright." "They say a lot of things," Thomas snapped, his fear turning into defensive anger. "He's a man of his word, which is more than I can say for the men holding my markers." "I owe $3,000, Riley. 3,000. If I don't pay by sundown tomorrow, they take the store, they take the house, and they take my thumbs. Jamie. He offered to pay it, all of it." "In exchange for me," Riley said, her voice trembling. "You sold me." "I arranged a marriage." Thomas slammed his hat onto the dresser. "He's a widower. He's got land. You'll be fed. You'll be warm. It's more than I can promise you here." He turned to leave, unable to bear the betrayal in her gaze. "He's coming at dawn. Be ready." That night, Riley didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the street. She thought of running, but the prairie was vast and merciless. Without a horse or a gun, she'd be dead in a day. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror, pale, young, terrified. She was a virgin, her knowledge of men limited to the polite nods of churchgoers and the rough catcalls of drunks she hurried past. Now she belonged to a man who lived above the snow line, a man who descended into town only twice a year, looking like a bear walking on 2 legs. Dawn came with a cold grey light. Riley was dressed in her best Sunday dress, a modest blue wool that buttoned to her chin. Her trunk sat by the door. When the wagon pulled up, the horses were massive. Clydesdales with hooves the size of dinner plates. The man driving them was even bigger. Jamie Blackwood sat on the bench seat like he was carved from the granite of the mountains behind him. He wore a buffalo hide coat, the fur thick and dark, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Riley walked out onto the porch, her father trailing behind her like a ghost. Jamie didn't climb down. He just turned his head. His face was a landscape of harsh lines. A thick, dark beard obscured his jaw, and a scar ran from his left temple down into the coarse hair on his cheek, a souvenir from a cougar, the town gossips claimed. But it was his eyes that froze Riley in place. They were grey, the colour of a winter storm, and completely unreadable. "Thomas," Jamie rumbled. His voice was deep, vibrating in Riley's chest. "Jamie," her father squeaked. She's ready." Jamie shifted his gaze to Riley. He looked her up and down, not with lust, but with the clinical appraisal of a man buying a brood mare. "She's thin," he stated flatly. "Winter up top is hard on the skinny ones." "She's strong," Thomas insisted quickly. "She works hard. She can cook, sew." "Does she know children?" Jamie interrupted. She helped with the Sunday school," Thomas lied. Riley had never taught Sunday school. The local matrons thought she read too many novels to be a good influence. Jamie grunted. He reached a gloved hand down. "Throw the trunk in the back. Come on, girl, daylight's burning." Riley turned to her father. She wanted to scream, to beg, to strike him, but seeing the tears welling in his weak, red-rimmed eyes, she simply stiffened her spine. "Goodbye, Papa," she said coldly. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. She climbed up. Jamie didn't offer a hand to help her. As soon as she was seated, he cracked the reins, and the heavy wagon lurched forward. She didn't look back as Bitter Creek disappeared into the dust. The journey took 6 hours. The road, if it could be called that, wound upward through switchbacks that hugged the edge of sheer cliffs. The air grew thinner and colder. The scrub brush of the plains gave way to towering pines and aspens. For the first 2 hours, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the snorting of the horses. Finally, Riley couldn't stand it. "Is it true?" she asked, staring straight ahead. Jamie didn't look at her. "Is what true? That you killed a man in Abilene?" Jamie chuckled, a low, dry sound. "No, that was my brother, Jed. I killed 2 men in Abilene." Riley's hands gripped her skirts until her knuckles turned white. "Scared?" he asked, glancing at her sideways. "Yes," she answered honestly. He nodded, seemingly respecting the truth. "Good. The mountain doesn't suffer fools. Fear keeps you alive." "I'm not a fool, Mr. Blackwood." "Jamie," he corrected. "And we'll see. You read books?" "Yes. Books don't teach you how to dress a deer or mend a fence. They teach you how to think," she retorted, surprising herself, "and how to understand people." Jamie was silent for a long moment. "Understanding me won't help you much. Just do the work, keep the kids from killing each other, and stay out of my way." And the other duties?" she asked, her face burning. Jamie pulled the horses to a halt. They had reached a plateau. Below them, the world spread out like a crumpled map. Ahead, nestled in a valley protected by granite peaks, lay a sprawling log cabin, a barn, and a corral. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. He turned to her, his grey eyes piercing. "I didn't buy a whore, Riley. I bought a mother. I sleep in the loft. You sleep in the main room with the girls. Unless you ask otherwise." Riley let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "I won't ask. Don't make promises you can't keep," he muttered, snapping the reins again. They pulled into the yard of Blackwood Ridge. The house was sturdy, built of massive logs, but the yard was a chaotic mess of broken tools, rusted metal, and overgrown weeds. It looked like a place where hope had died a long time ago. "Kids!" Jamie bellowed as he hopped down from the wagon. The front door banged open. 3 children spilled out, but they didn't run to greet him. They stood on the porch, watching. The oldest, a boy of about 12, held a wood-splitting axe with an ease that was terrifying. This was Caleb. His hair was long and matted, his face smeared with soot. He looked at Riley with pure, unadulterated hatred. Next was a girl, maybe 9, Emily. She wore a dress that was 3 sizes too small and covered in mud. She was chewing on a lock of her hair, her eyes wide and vacant. The youngest, a boy of 5 named Jacob, was hiding behind Caleb's leg. He wasn't wearing pants, just a long, filthy shirt. "This is Riley," Jamie announced, gesturing to her as she climbed down, her boots sinking into the mud. "She's staying." Caleb spat on the ground, missing Riley's boot by an inch. "We don't need her. We didn't need the last one, neither." "Watch your mouth, Caleb," Jamie warned, his voice dropping an octave. "She's here to clean this pigsty and make sure you don't grow up to be a heathen. Put her trunk inside." Caleb glared at his father, a silent war passing between them, before he slammed the axe into a stump and grabbed the trunk. He shoved past Riley, shouldering her hard. "Nice to meet you," Riley said to the air, her voice trembling slightly. Emily giggled, a high, disturbing sound, and ran off towards the barn. Jacob just stared, then turned and pissed off the side of the porch. "They're spirited," Riley managed to say. "They're feral," Jamie corrected. He began unhitching the horses. "Dinner is at sundown. There's salt pork in the cellar and beans in the jar. Don't burn it." Riley walked into the cabin. The smell hit her instantly. Unwashed bodies, wood smoke, and rotting food. The main room was cavernous, dominated by a massive stone fireplace. But it was a wreck. Dishes were piled high on the table, crusted with weeks-old food. Clothes were strewn everywhere. She stepped further in, overwhelmed. This was her life now. A prison of filth at the top of the world. She saw a door slightly ajar to the right. Pushing it open, she found what must have been the bedroom of Jamie's late wife. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was untouched. A layer of dust covered everything, but the bed was made perfectly. On the vanity sat a silver hairbrush and a small, framed, tintype photograph. Riley walked over and picked up the photo. It showed a beautiful woman, delicate and smiling, standing next to Jamie. But Jamie looked different in the picture. Younger, yes, but also softer. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. Riley turned the photo over. On the back, written in a jagged, frantic scrawl, were the words, "He is not what he seems. God help the children." A floorboard creaked behind her. Riley spun around. Caleb was standing in the doorway, the shadows hiding his eyes. "You shouldn't be in here," the boy whispered. "Pa doesn't like people in here." I was just looking," Riley stammered, putting the photo down. Caleb stepped into the light. The bruise on his cheek was fresh. "She died in this room," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Screaming." "Who? Your mother?" "No," Caleb smiled, and it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The one before you. The one Pa brought home last winter. She didn't last a week." Riley felt the blood freeze in her veins. "Last winter? But my father said—" "Your father lied," Caleb said. "Welcome home, Riley." The first night on Blackwood Ridge passed in a vigil of terror. Riley dragged the heavy oak dresser in front of her bedroom door, the scraping sound echoing loudly in the silent house. She lay awake, clutching a rusty pair of sewing scissors she'd found in her trunk, listening to the wind howl through the chinks in the logs. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps, but no one came. Morning brought no relief, only the stark reality of her prison. When Riley stepped out of her room, the house was empty. Jamie was gone. The silence was heavy, broken only by the buzzing of flies near the kitchen sink. She remembered Jamie's order, "Clean this pigsty." Riley tied her hair back with a scrap of ribbon and rolled up her sleeves. She started in the kitchen. It wasn't just dirty. It was archaeological. Layers of grease coated the cast-iron stove. The table was sticky with spilled syrup, and molasses that had hardened into amber traps for dead insects. As she scraped at a pot, she felt eyes on her. She turned. Jacob, the 5-year-old, was watching her from under the table. He was clutching a dirty rag doll that looked like it had been chewed by a dog. "Hungry?" Riley asked softly. Jacob didn't answer, but his eyes darted to the pantry. Riley found a tin of biscuits that were stale but edible and a jar of apple butter. She handed him a biscuit. He snatched it like a wild animal and scurried away into the shadows of the living room. By noon, she had cleared the table and scrubbed the floor of the kitchen. The water in her bucket had turned black 3 times. She was sweating, her dress clinging to her back, when the front door swung open. It wasn't Jamie. It was Caleb. He walked in, tracking mud across her freshly scrubbed floor. He did it deliberately, looking her dead in the eye with a smirk that was too old for his face. "Wipe your feet," Riley said, her voice shaking but firm. Caleb laughed. "Make me." He walked over to the stove, opened the pot of beans she had put on to simmer, and spat into it. Riley gasped. The sheer malice of the act stunned her. "Why would you do that? That's your supper, too." "I ain't eating your poison," Caleb sneered. "My ma cooked better than you. Even the last ones cooked better, before she started seeing things." "The last one," Riley said, stepping closer, gripping the ladle like a weapon. "What was her name, Caleb?" "Doesn't matter. Names don't stick up here. She thought she could fix us. Just like you." "Then she went to the barn one night and never came back." "You said she died in the bedroom?" Riley challenged, remembering his words from yesterday. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Did I? Maybe I forgot. Or maybe she died in both places." He leaned in, smelling of pine resin and unwashed boy. "You won't last until the first snow, Riley. Pa breaks horses, and he breaks women. He just doesn't know he does it." Before Riley could respond, the heavy thud of boots on the porch silenced them both. Jamie filled the doorway. He held 2 skinned rabbits by their hind legs. He looked at the mud on the floor, then at Caleb, then at the pot of beans. "Supper ready?" Jamie asked, his voice gravelly. "Caleb spat in it," Riley said. She refused to protect the boy. If this was a war, she would fight. Jamie dropped the rabbits on the table. He looked at his son. "Is that true?" Caleb crossed his arms. "She's lying. She burned it, and she's trying to blame me." Jamie walked over to the pot. He lifted the lid and sniffed. Then he looked at the floor, the clean planks versus the fresh mud trails leading from Caleb's boots. Without a word, Jamie reached out and grabbed Caleb by the back of his shirt. He lifted the 12-year-old off the ground as easily as if he were a sack of flour. He marched him to the door and threw him out onto the porch. "You don't eat tonight," Jamie commanded, "and you chop wood until I say stop. If I hear that axe stop swinging, you sleep in the barn with the mules." He slammed the door and turned to Riley. The violence of his movement made her flinch, stepping back against the stove. Jamie paused, seeing her fear. His face softened just a fraction. "I don't hit women, Riley, and I don't let liars eat at my table. Throw the beans out. We'll eat the rabbits." I don't know how to cook rabbit," she admitted, her voice a whisper. Jamie sighed, a long, weary sound. He pulled a knife from his belt. "Then watch, and learn fast." That night, they ate roasted rabbit in silence. Jacob ate voraciously. Emily, the middle child, picked at her food, humming a strange, tuneless melody, her eyes fixed on the empty chair where Caleb should have been. Outside, the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the axe against wood continued long into the dark. Riley lay in bed that night, her body aching from the scrubbing. She felt a strange sense of victory. Jamie had taken her side. But as she drifted off, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was coming from the ceiling, from the attic. It sounded like dragging, heavy, slow dragging, and then a soft, rhythmic weeping. She didn't last a week. Riley pulled the quilt over her head, praying for dawn. 3 weeks passed. The leaves on the aspens turned to gold, shimmering like coins against the dark green of the pines. Riley settled into a rhythm of exhaustion. She learned to skin a rabbit without vomiting. She learned that Emily would only speak if you whispered to her, and that Jacob would do anything for a spoonful of honey. But Caleb remained a brooding storm cloud, watching her with a mixture of hatred and calculation. And the noises in the attic continued, always at night, always when the wind died down. One brisk Tuesday, Jamie announced he was going to the high pasture to check on the herd. "I'll be gone till sundown," he said, checking the load in his Winchester rifle. "Keep the kids close. There's a timber wolf been stalking the calves. Big male. Smart." "We'll be fine," Riley said, wiping her hands on her apron. She had grown bolder. The mountain air, crisp and clean, was filling her lungs with a resilience she didn't know she possessed. "Don't go past the creek," Jamie warned, his grey eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. He seemed to be studying her, looking for the cracks in her armor, and keep the rifle by the door. After he rode off, Riley decided to wash the linens. The creek was freezing, numbing her fingers as she scrubbed the heavy sheets against the stones. Jacob was playing with rocks nearby, while Emily sat on the bank, braiding blades of grass. Riley was wringing out one of Jamie's shirts. It was massive, the fabric heavy and rough, when the birds suddenly stopped singing. The silence was absolute. Riley looked up. Across the creek, emerging from the tree line, was the wolf. Jamie hadn't lied. It was enormous, its fur a matted grey-white, its eyes yellow and intelligent. It wasn't looking at the calves. It was looking at Jacob. "Jacob," Riley whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Come here! Slowly!" The boy looked up, saw the wolf, and froze. The wolf took a step into the water, its lip curling to reveal yellow fangs. Riley didn't think. She didn't scream. She dropped the shirt and grabbed the washboard, a heavy piece of oak and corrugated tin. "Run to the house!" "Oh!" Riley screamed at the children. "Go, now!" Emily grabbed Jacob's hand and dragged him towards the cabin. The sudden movement triggered the wolf. It launched itself across the creek in a splash of icy water. It wasn't going for the kids anymore. It was coming for the obstacle. It was coming for Riley. She swung the washboard with both hands, screaming a primal sound she had never heard herself make. The wood connected with the wolf's snout with a sickening crack. The beast yelped, stunned, but recovered instantly. It lunged, its jaws snapping on Riley's forearm. Pain, hot and searing, blinded her. She fell back into the mud, the weight of the animal crushing her. She could smell its fetid breath, see the madness in its eyes. She kicked, scrambled, her hand searching for a rock. Anything. Bang! The sound was like a cannon shot. The wolf's head exploded. The weight on top of her went limp. Riley lay there, gasping, pinned beneath the carcass. She looked up. Caleb stood on the porch, 50 yards away. The smoke curled from the barrel of the heavy Winchester rifle. He lowered the gun, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. He had saved her. Riley shoved the dead wolf off her legs and sat up, clutching her bleeding arm. She looked at Caleb. For the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a terrified boy. Before she could stand, the thundering of hooves filled the yard. Jamie. He had heard the shot. He flew off his horse before it had even stopped, his revolver drawn. He saw the dead wolf, the blood on the grass, and Riley clutching her arm. "Riley!" He roared her name, a sound torn from his throat. He was beside her in seconds, kneeling in the mud. He didn't ask what happened. He grabbed her arm, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he inspected the bite. "It's deep," he growled, "but it missed the artery." He looked up at the porch. "Caleb, get the whiskey and the needle, now!" Caleb scrambled inside. Jamie scooped Riley up into his arms. She was light against his chest, and for a moment the pain receded, replaced by the overwhelming sensation of his strength. He smelled of horse, leather, and sweat, a masculine scent that made her head spin. "I told you to stay by the house," he muttered as he carried her. But there was no anger in his voice, only a frantic tension. "I was washing your shirt," she murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I think I ruined it." "Damn the shirt," Jamie whispered into her hair. Inside the cabin, Jamie set her on the table. He worked with the efficiency of a field medic. He poured whiskey on the wound. Riley screamed, arching her back, and then threaded a needle. "This will hurt," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Look at me. Don't look at the arm. Just look at me." Riley stared into his storm-grey eyes. They were wide, the pupils dilated. She saw fear there. Fear for her. "Talk to me," she gasped as the needle pierced her skin. "Tell me something true." Jamie didn't look away. "My middle name is Arthur. My father was a drunk, and I've never seen a woman fight a wolf with a washboard." Riley let out a choked laugh that turned into a sob. When he was finished, he bandaged the arm in clean linen. He didn't let go of her hand immediately. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, rough skin against soft. "You're not what I expected, Riley Miller," he said quietly. "And you're not what they say you are, Jamie Blackwood," she replied. The moment stretched, charged with a sudden electric intimacy. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the widower and the virgin, bound by blood and adrenaline. Then Caleb walked into the room. He stood in the doorway, watching them. The vulnerability was gone from his face, replaced by that familiar, cold mask. "I killed it," Caleb said flatly. "I saved her." Jamie stood up, his height filling the room. He walked over to his son and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You made a hell of a shot, son. You did good." Caleb flinched at the touch, but he didn't pull away. He looked at Riley. "Don't think this changes anything. You still don't belong here." But as he turned to leave, Riley saw it. The slight tremble in his hands. He wasn't hateful because he was evil. He was hateful because he was terrified of losing someone else. That night, the snow began to fall. It started as a whisper and grew into a roar. The first blizzard of the season. They were trapped. The storm raged for 3 days. The snow piled up to the windowsills, turning the cabin into a dark, warm cave, disconnected from the world. Cabin fever set in quickly. The air grew stale, but the dynamic in the house had shifted since the wolf attack. Jamie no longer looked past Riley. He watched her. When she poured his coffee, his hand would brush hers. When she read by the fire, she would catch him staring at her from his chair, his expression brooding and hungry. But the truce was fragile. On the second night of the storm, Jacob fell ill. It started with a cough, dry and hacking, and rapidly turned into a raging fever. His small chest rattled with every breath. Jamie was beside himself. The stoic mountain man crumbled when it came to his children's pain. He paced the floor, checking the windows, looking at the white wall of snow that prevented him from riding for a doctor. "He's burning up," Jamie said, his voice cracking as he felt the boy's forehead. "Get me cool water and vinegar," Riley commanded. She had taken over. This was her domain. She knew illness. She had nursed her father through bouts of ague. "And strip the heavy blankets. He needs to cool down." "He'll freeze," Jamie argued. "He will cook his own brain if you don't listen to me," Riley snapped. Jamie obeyed. For 6 hours they worked in tandem. Riley sponged the boy's body, whispering soothing words, while Jamie held his small hand, his face grey with worry. Around 3 a.m., the fever broke. Jacob fell into a peaceful, natural sleep. Riley slumped back in the rocking chair, exhausted. Her injured arm throbbed. Jamie sat on the floor near the fire, his head in his hands. "You saved him," Jamie said into the darkness. "He's strong, like his father," Riley said softly. Jamie looked up. The firelight cast deep shadows across his scarred face. "I couldn't save his mother. Or the others." "The others?" Riley asked, treading carefully. "Caleb talks about a woman. Last winter." Jamie let out a harsh laugh. He reached for a bottle of whiskey on the floor and took a long pull. "Caleb talks too much. But he's not lying. Her name was Mary. I hired her to help. I didn't touch her, Riley. I swear it. But the isolation, the wind, it got into her head. He stood up and walked to the window, staring at the snow. She started hearing things, started saying my wife, my first wife, Clara, was walking the halls. One night, Mary just ran out, said the ghost was chasing her, ran straight into a blizzard. We found her 3 days later, frozen solid. He turned to Riley, his eyes tormented. People in town say I killed her. Just like they say I killed Clara. Did you? Riley asked. She needed to know. Jamie walked over to her. He knelt beside her chair, putting him at eye level with her. He reached up and touched the scar on his face. Clara didn't die of fright, and I didn't kill her. It was a raiding party. Renegades. 5 years ago. His voice was void of emotion, which made it more terrifying. I was out in the pasture. By the time I got back, the house was burning. I pulled Caleb and Emily out. Jacob was just a baby. Clara had hid him in the root cellar. He took Riley's hand. His grip was hard, desperate. I went back in for Clara. The roof collapsed. That's where I got this scar, a burning beam. I held her hand, Riley. I held her hand while the fire took her. I couldn't lift the beam. Tears streamed down Riley's face. The monster of Blackwood Ridge was just a man who had walked through hell and never fully left it. I'm sorry, she whispered. I brought you here to be a mother, Jamie said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. Because I'm failing them. I'm a ghost in my own house. But looking at you now, seeing you fight for my boy. He leaned in. The air between them crackled. Riley's heart raced. She was a virgin, unlearned in the ways of men, but her body responded to him with an ancient instinct. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to know the feel of his beard against her skin. Jamie, she breathed. He hesitated, his face inches from hers. You're 18. You have a life ahead of you. I'm a graveyard, Riley. I'm not afraid of ghosts, she said, lifting her hand to touch his unscarred cheek. Jamie closed his eyes at her touch. He leaned into her palm. Then, slowly, he opened his eyes and leaned forward. His lips brushed hers. Tentative. Testing. It wasn't a ravishment. It was a question. Riley answered by pressing back. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. Jamie groaned low in his throat, his hands coming up to cup her face. For a moment, the storm outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat of the fire, and the man who tasted of whiskey and sorrow. Suddenly, a loud thump from upstairs broke them apart. Jamie pulled back, his hand going instantly to the knife at his belt. The wind? Riley asked, breathless, her lips swollen. No, Jamie said, his eyes hard again. That wasn't the wind. He moved to the ladder that led to the loft and the attic hatch beyond it. Stay here. But before he could climb, the front door rattled. Not from the wind. Someone was pounding on it. Jamie froze. Who the hell travels in this storm? He grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. Who's there? He bellowed. A muffled voice shouted back, barely audible over the wind. Open up! U.S. Marshal, we have a warrant! Riley's blood ran cold. Jamie threw the bolt and opened the door. A swirl of snow blew in, followed by a man wrapped in a heavy duster, shivering violently. He wasn't alone. Another man was behind him, supporting a third figure who looked half dead. The man in the lead pulled down his scarf. It was a face Riley recognized from town. Garrett Cole, a man who had wanted to court her, whom her father had rejected because of his cruelty to horses. He was a deputy now? Garrett? Riley gasped. Garrett looked at Riley, then at Jamie. A nasty grin spread across his frozen face. Well, well, Garrett sneered, stepping inside and shaking the snow off his coat. Looks like we've found the love nest. Jamie Blackwood, you're under arrest. For what? Jamie demanded, keeping his rifle leveled. Garrett pointed a gloved finger at Jamie. For the murder of Mary Higgins. We found her journal in town, Jamie. She mailed it to her sister before she died. She wrote that you were poisoning her, that you were trying to keep her quiet about what you keep in your attic. Jamie went rigid. Riley looked at him, panic rising in her chest. I don't know what you're talking about, Jamie growled. Don't you? Garrett laughed. He looked at the ceiling. Then you won't mind if we take a look upstairs. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut the heavy, smoke-filled air. Garrett Cole stood with his hand hovering near his holster, his eyes gleaming with a malicious triumph. He wasn't just a lawman doing a job. He was a man settling a grudge. He looked at Riley, taking in her disheveled hair and the bandage on her arm, and his lip curled. "Step aside, Jamie," Garrett commanded, "or I'll shoot you where you stand and tell the judge you resisted." Jamie didn't move. He blocked the ladder to the loft, his body a human shield. "There's nothing up there but old furniture and rats." "Then you won't mind us looking?" Garrett sneered. He signaled to his deputy, a nervous-looking man named Pickets. "Check it, and keep your gun out." Jamie looked at Riley. His eyes were pleading, desperate. It was a look of vulnerability she hadn't thought possible on his granite face. "Trust me," his eyes seemed to say. "Whatever happens, trust me." Reluctantly, Jamie stepped aside. Pickett scrambled up the ladder, pushing open the trapdoor to the attic. He disappeared into the darkness. Silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Riley could hear her own heart thumping in her ears. Caleb had moved to stand in front of Emily and Jacob, a small knife gripped in his hand behind his back. "Holy Mother of God!" Pickett shouted from above. A scuffle ensued, the sound of crashing wood, a grunt of pain, and a strange, high-pitched, mewling sound. "Get him down here!" Garrett barked. Pickett reappeared at the trapdoor, his face pale as milk. He was dragging something. Someone. He hauled a man down the ladder. Or what was left of a man. The figure crumbled onto the floorboards of the main room. He was emaciated, dressed in rags. His face was covered in a thick, matted beard. But it was the burns that made Riley gasp. The entire left side of his face was a landscape of melted flesh, old scars that pulled his mouth into a permanent rictus grin. He was shaking violently, making soft, whimpering noises, clutching a wooden toy horse. "Jed," Jamie whispered, the word broken. Riley's hands flew to her mouth. "Your brother. You said you killed him." "I lied," Jamie said, his voice hollow. "I couldn't do it. The fire that took Clara. It took Jed's mind, too. He started it, Riley. By accident. He knocked over a lantern in the barn. He tried to save her. That's how he got burned. But the guilt, it broke him. He's been up there for 5 years. He's harmless. He's just a child in a man's body." Garrett Cole began to laugh. It was a cold, cruel sound. "Harmless. This is Jedediah Blackwood. The man wanted in Abilene for bank robbery before he came here, and you've been hiding him." Garrett walked over and kicked the cowering man in the ribs. Jed yelped, curling into a ball. "Stop it!" Riley screamed, lunging forward. "He's crippled! Can't you see that?" Garrett backhanded Riley. The blow was fast and hard. She went sprawling onto the rug, tasting copper. Jamie roared. He launched himself at Garrett, tackling him to the ground. The two men rolled, smashing into the table. Jamie pummeled Garrett's face, his rage exploding. But Pickett's was faster. He slammed the butt of his pistol into the back of Jamie's head. Jamie collapsed, unconscious. "Pa!" Caleb screamed, rushing forward, but Pickett's leveled his gun at the boy. "Back off, kid!" Garrett stood up, wiping blood from his split lip. He looked down at Jamie's motionless body, then at Riley, who was clutching her cheek. "Assaulting a federal officer," Garrett spat, "harboring a fugitive, and murder." "He didn't kill anyone," Riley cried, tears mixing with the blood on her face. "Mary died of the cold, and Jed is his brother." "Tell it to the hangman," Garrett said. He pulled a pair of iron cuffs from his belt and shackled Jamie's hands behind his back. "Pickets, tie the burn victim up. We're taking them both to town. The storm's breaking. We can make it to the halfway station." "You can't take him," Riley begged. grabbing Garrett's coat. "The children! We can't survive here alone!" Garrett grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were dark with a predatory hunger. "Oh, don't worry, Riley. I'm not leaving you alone. Pickets will take the prisoners down. I'm staying right here. Someone needs to protect the assets until the trial." Riley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind. She saw the lust in his eyes. He had planned this. He wanted Jamie gone so he could have her. Pickets dragged the groggy Jamie and the weeping Jed out into the snow. Jamie locked eyes with Riley one last time before the door slammed. Check the loose stone. He hadn't said it, but she heard it in her memory. He had told her once, weeks ago, that he kept his insurance under the hearth. Garrett locked the door and turned the key, pocketing it. He took off his coat, throwing it onto the rocking chair. "Now," Garrett smiled, loosening his gun belt. "Let's play house, Mrs. Blackwood." The cabin felt smaller with Garrett Cole in it. He moved with an arrogance that filled the space, touching things that didn't belong to him. He picked up the silver hairbrush on the vanity. He opened the pantry and ate an apple, chewing loudly. Riley stood by the fireplace, her body rigid. Caleb was in the corner, holding Jacob and Emily. The boy's eyes were darting around the room, looking for a weapon, but Garrett had already collected the rifle and the axe, placing them out of reach. "You should make some coffee, Riley," Garrett said, sitting in Jamie's chair and putting his muddy boots up on the table. "It's going to be a long night." "I am not your servant," Riley said, her voice trembling but defiant, "and I am not your woman." Garrett chuckled. "Not yet. But Jamie is going to hang, Riley. Everyone knows it. A man who hides a monster like Jed, a man whose wives keep dying. The jury will convict him in 5 minutes, and once he's gone, you'll have debts. You'll have no home, unless you have a friend." He stood up and walked toward her. Riley backed away until she hit the stone of the fireplace. "I tried to court you properly," Garrett whispered, trapping her. "But your father thought I wasn't good enough. Said I had a mean streak. He was right." He reached out to stroke her hair. Riley flinched, her hand behind her back, feeling the rough stone of the hearth. The loose stone. It was down low, near the floor. "Get away from her!" Caleb yelled. The boy charged, swinging a heavy cast-iron skillet he had pulled from the drying rack. Garrett spun around, catching Caleb's arm mid-swing. He wrenched the skillet away and shoved the boy hard. Caleb flew backward, hitting his head against the log wall. He slumped to the floor, dazed. "Caleb!" Riley screamed. "Annoying brat," Garrett muttered. He turned back to Riley. "Now where were we?" "You're sick," Riley hissed. "You don't know the truth. Mary wrote a journal." "I know," Garrett interrupted, his smile widening. "I have it. It says Jamie was poisoning her." "Because you wrote it." Riley realized it in a flash. The handwriting. She had seen Garrett's handwriting on a receipt at her father's store once. It was jagged, frantic, just like the writing on the back of the photo, just like the journal entries she had heard about. Garrett's smile faltered. "You're smarter than you look. Too smart." He grabbed her by the shoulders, shoving her against the mantel. "Mary was sweet on me, Riley. I used to come up here when Jamie was out hunting. She was lonely. But then she got clingy. Said she was going to tell Jamie. I couldn't have that. A little arsenic in her sugar bowl. She went crazy before she died. Ran out into the snow. It was perfect. You killed her," Riley breathed. "And you framed Jamie. And now I'm going to comfort his widow," Garrett said, leaning in to kiss her. Riley dropped to her knees. Garrett laughed. "Begging? I like that." But she wasn't begging. Her fingers found the loose stone near the floor. She dug her nails in and pried it loose. Behind it, her hand touched cold metal. A revolver. A snub-nose Colt. Jamie's backup. Riley ripped the gun from the hole. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the Sunday school lessons or the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." She thought about Caleb on the floor. She thought of Jamie in chains. She jammed the barrel into Garrett's stomach and pulled the trigger. Click, a misfire. The gun was old, the powder was damp. Garrett froze, then he roared with laughter. He backhanded her again, harder this time. Riley fell, the gun skittering across the floor. "Nice try," Garrett snarled. He unbuckled his belt. "Now you're going to pay for that." He loomed over her. Riley squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the violation. Suddenly the front door exploded inward. Splinters of wood showered the room. The heavy oak door had been kicked off its hinges. Garrett spun around, reaching for his holster. Jamie Blackwood stood in the doorway. He looked like a demon rising from the pit. His hands were bloody where he had seemingly slipped or broken the cuffs. A length of chain still dangled from one wrist. His face was a mask of absolute, murderous fury. Behind him, in the snow, pickets lay unconscious or dead. "Jamie?" Garrett gasped, his voice cracking. "How?" Jamie didn't speak. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. He charged. Garrett fired a shot, wild in his panic. The bullet shattered a lantern, plunging the room into flickering shadows. Jamie hit Garrett with the force of a freight train. He drove the marshal through the dining table, splintering the wood. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Garrett was younger, but Jamie was fighting for his life, his wife, and his children. Jamie ignored the punches Garrett landed on his ribs. He wrapped the dangling chain around Garrett's neck. "You touched her!" Jamie growled, tightening the chain. "You touched my family!" Garrett clawed at the chain, his face turning purple, his heels drumming on the floorboards. "Jamie, stop!" Riley screamed. She scrambled up, grabbing Jamie's arm. "Stop! Don't kill him!" Jamie looked up at her, his eyes wild, barely human. He tried to... "If you kill him, you hang for sure," Riley cried. "We have the truth now. He confessed. He told me he killed Mary. Caleb heard him. We all heard him." Jamie froze. He looked at Garrett's gasping blue face. He looked at Riley, seeing the bruise forming on her cheek. Slowly, agonizingly, Jamie loosened the chain. He didn't let go, but he let air back into the marshal's lungs. Garrett sucked in a ragged breath, coughing violently. "Tie him up," Jamie commanded Caleb, who was staggering to his feet. "Use the hog rope." Jamie stood up, swaying slightly. He looked at Riley. He reached out a trembling hand to touch her face. "Are you—" "I'm fine," she sobbed, throwing herself into his arms. "I'm fine. You came back." "I told you," Jamie whispered, burying his face in her neck. "I don't break promises." The trial of Garrett Cole was the talk of the Wyoming Territory for a decade, with the testimony of Riley, Caleb, and the battered deputy pickets, who admitted Garrett had forced him to falsify the arrest. The truth came out. The exhumation of Mary Higgins' body revealed traces of arsenic, just as Riley had testified Garrett admitted. Garrett Cole was hanged in Cheyenne on a rainy Tuesday in April. But the real shock, the twist that people in Bitter Creek couldn't stop whispering about, wasn't the murder. It was the family on Blackwood Ridge. Jamie was cleared of all charges. The judge, a stern man named Holloway, granted Jamie custody of his brother, Jedediah, deeming that the mountain man had provided better care for the invalid than any asylum could. Spring came to the mountain with a riot of wildflowers. The snow melted into rushing creeks, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. Riley stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of violet and orange. She held a basket of fresh eggs. She had filled out. The mountain air and Jamie's cooking had put healthy curves on her frame. She looked radiant. Caleb was in the yard, chopping wood. He wasn't doing it out of anger anymore. He was teaching Jacob how to hold the axe. "Keep your feet wide," Caleb was saying patiently. "Don't want to lose a toe." Emily sat on the swing Jamie had built, reading a book aloud. Sitting next to her, listening with a crooked, gentle smile, was Uncle Jed. He wore clean clothes, and his beard was trimmed. He was still scarred, still simple, but he was no longer a ghost in the attic. He was family. The screen door creaked. Jamie stepped out. He wrapped his arms around Riley from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Thinking about running away?" he teased, his voice a low rumble against her back. Riley leaned into him. I was thinking about my father. He wrote to me, asked for money again. Did you send it? No, Riley smiled. I sent him a letter, told him I was too busy raising his grandchildren. Jamie stiffened. He turned her around, his grey eyes searching hers. Grandchildren? Plural? Riley took his large, calloused hand and placed it on her stomach. It was still flat, but the secret was there, warm and undeniable. We're going to need another room, she whispered. Maybe we can convert the attic. Make it bright. New windows. No more shadows. Jamie looked at her with a wonder that erased the years of hardship from his face. He kissed her, deeply and tenderly, right there on the porch where everyone could see. The town had expected a tragedy. They expected the Virgin to be broken by the beast. They expected blood on the snow. Instead, they got a love story. At 18, Riley Miller was given to a mountain man to settle a debt. It was the worst day of her life. Looking at her husband, at the children playing in the twilight, and the peace that had finally settled over Blackwood Ridge, Riley knew the truth. It was the best bargain anyone had ever made. The legend of Jamie and Riley Blackwood didn't end there. They stayed on the ridge for 50 years. They raised 7 children of their own, alongside Caleb, Emily, and Jacob. Riley eventually opened the first school in the county, right there in their living room. And Jamie, the man they called a savage, became the most protective, gentle father the territory had ever seen. He never picked up a gun again, except to hunt for food. When Riley passed away at the age of 74, they say Jamie walked out into the winter snow and simply sat down under the old aspen tree where they had shared their first kiss. He followed her the next morning, unable to endure a world without her light. They were buried side by side, their headstones marking the spot where a debt became a dynasty. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations, and that love can bloom even in the coldest, darkest places. Wow, what a journey that was. The transformation of Jamie from a beast to a loving father, and Riley's growth from a timid girl to the matriarch of the mountain is just incredible. If you enjoyed this story of redemption, hidden secrets, and undying love, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good romance, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching.